Howdy, everybody. It's your boy TK from Rotlot Media. I'm super excited to be talking to you guys today because we are going to be talking about Warhammer 40,000 and why you should be playing it. Just to give you a quick little bit of information about this universe, it is a grim, dark setting where different factions are fighting an unwinnable war of attrition, and you have different play styles, different lore, different factions. You have the Imperium of Men, you have your Chaos factions, and you have your Xenos factions. And each one of them, like I said, has a different play style, different lore. And for me to get you set into this universe and really get you to try it out, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite factions, which is the Tyranids. This is your Hive fleet, your endless swarm of monsters and abominations that is entered our Milky Way galaxy and has a singular purpose: to eat and obtain all the biomass that they can. They are going planet to planet to plunder, eat, and kill everything to get that biomass. And they have this Shadow of the Warp effect where it is affecting everybody that's surrounding them. And I absolutely love this faction. And it's the first one that got me into the setting. And I was thinking the best way to get you guys into it would to show off some of my models. So I recorded I've recorded some videos of me showing off the models, and maybe that'll get you into the universe itself. My particular play style, because there's a couple different ways you can play this faction. My favorite play style is to play the Crusher Stampede, aka Monster Mash. So I have all of these gigantic, big behemoth models where eventually you'll see in some of the videos I put like a little Chaos Space Marine. So, a little Space Marine, model to show off how big these models can be. And yeah, I absolutely love this faction. I think everybody getting into the setting typically finds Tyranids, and it's actually a really popular faction to get into just because there's just so much variety, and just a lot of people like to play the unending swarm of bugs and the hive mind, kind of like a Zerg from like StarCraft. And yeah, I'm gonna play some clips. I'm gonna explain the units and some of the things that make them super cool, and I can't wait to hopefully get some more people into Warhammer 40k. The more the merrier. Alright, I'll go on ahead and I'll play you them clips. See you in a bit. Bye. Alrighty, so the first model I'm going to be showing to you guys is my first and favorite model of the, Tyranids. This is the Flying Hive Tyrant. This is a gigantic flying monstrosity that commands the battlefield. He is an absolute blast to collect and paint up. As you can see, I went with a white, red, and blue theme. Yeah, America, #1, woo! But no, I was trying to go with a more snow theme for this faction. And this is the paint theme that I went with. So yeah, I just want to go over the unit, show off how massive it is, and just explain some things that make it really awesome. So the first thing about the Flying Hive Tyrant, it has the flying keyword. That means it can fly over terrain. It is able to just avoid a lot of models in its way and trying to get into your backline. It is such a fun model to run on the tabletop, especially with its second keyword, which is Deep Strike. So effectively what that means is, instead of putting this model on the battlefield, what you do is you hold it off to the side, and then during your, right at your movement phase, you will call down this unit. You will select, as long as you put it down 9 inches or further from an enemy unit, you can just drop this model into the battlefield, typically into your opponent's back line, and you just go and rip and shred them. He is such a fun model to use, and another one of the things that I really enjoy about him is he can reduce stratagems, which is kind of like your abilities in game that you can use. He can reduce them by 1 command point, and that just makes it so clean with this unit. Sometimes I don't even put him in reserves to drop down with deep strength. I'll put him on the battlefield just so I can use some of my command points, such as, oh, normally my monsters can't go through buildings because they're too big. Only infantry can do that. So if I spend a command point and he's within, I think, 12 inches of that model, I can, instead of costing me 1 CP, it costs me 0. So you can see a lot of the playmaking that this model can do, and it just makes the experience so much fun. Obviously, with this model, it is on the cheaper end for an HQ unit, and as fun as he does, he is a little bit on the older side. His stat line isn't the best that some people would want to bring him, but most people bring the Flying Hive Tyrant just because of how versatile he is. And he was the first model I got and collected with like a combat patrol that I picked up. And I've never regretted having my boy. I think he is so good, so much fun. And I think everybody should get a Flying Hive Tyrant. You get one, you get one. It's like Oprah Winfrey. It's like a rhino. Everybody gets a rhino for free. And yeah, I just wanted to go over this model, show you the size comparison of, him next to a Space Marine-esque model. And, maybe I can sell you guys on joining the Crush Your Stampede gang. Big boys unite. Even though these are gigantic monsters, they're still just a little guy to me. Alrighty, well, with that, I think I'm going to go on ahead and talk about our next unit. Alright, see you in a bit. Alright, and for our next unit, we have the Tyrannofex. This guy is a living... I call him a railgun is what I call him, but he's like a living artillery piece where he has very good range, 24-inch shots, and he is just so much fun to do. And he has a lot of keywords with some of his weapon profiles where he has like sustain hits 1, head, twin link, things like that. A lot of rerolls, a lot of extra shots. Like one of his attacks gets like 20 shots and hitting on 3, strength 5. Like, this is a fun model where if you see your enemies like tank or like their big ticket monster, he will just blast straight through them and deal so much damage. Another cool thing about the Tyrannofex, besides how awesome he is and how big, he also has an ability where if he was to receive damage, let's say your opponent has like a really powerful like damaging strike that does like, let's say 6 damage. When he receives that 1 instance of damage, he can use his ability to effectively negate that damage or turn it to 0. And so the amount of survivability that this unit has is astronomical and kind of key to keeping your backline going hard. Because if your opponent can't kill your artillery line, well, if they just shot at you, that means you're about to shoot back at them. The Tyrannofex, I know he just got nerfed with a 10-point increase, but with how the list was and how all the units have been in my army, pretty much, I think I went up 15 points, but I dropped down like 25. And so it's been very nice, and I think everybody should pick up a Tyrannofex. He is a little bit gangly with how massive he is, but he's just so much fun. And I think everybody who enjoys big monsters, especially ones that go, pick a direction, delete that direction, you should be playing. And yeah, I think he's awesome. Like I said, he's the railgun to me. I have another unit that I call the artillery unit. It's all pretty much the same, and once you get to him, you'll understand. But yeah, that's the Tyrannofex in a T, and hopefully you enjoy my little guy. Alright, I'll show you the next one. Alright, well, I wanted to change it up for you guys for a little bit. These are actually infantry models, so they're a little bit smaller compared to the monsters I run, but that's because in this list I'm able to afford bringing in these smaller guys, and the Von Ryan Leapers are such an exceptional unit that I really don't see people bring They are awesome because of all the keywords that they have. They have stealth, so they're harder to shoot at. They have infiltrators, which means when you're deploying, they can deploy further up in the battlefield, potentially move blocking your opponent. And they have fights first, which means if they are fighting, especially if you're on the defensive end, you get to fight first before your opponent does. And it can be really backbreaking for your opponent. So I like to use these guys to screen ahead and either take out important units and or to take objectives that I don't have to worry about. And if my opponent has to come to me, it makes it super difficult for them. And they also have the heroic intervention, ability for free. So being able to quickly stop mid fight to join in and pretty much maybe take a unit away from your opponent before they even get to finish all their attacks. It's just so nice. And as much as I'm a big monster guy, I do like running these kind of utility units that will take care of the needs that I need for my army, because I can't get everywhere on the battlefield, but with these guys, absolutely, they're able to do their job, and pretty good in fact. Yeah, and like I said, nice infantry models. Definitely think people should pick up the Von Ryan Leapers. Any of the infiltration based units in Tyranids, they're so good and also look awesome. Because you have the Lictors, the Neurolictors, you have the Von Ryan Leapers. You can build an entire detachment based around guys like this, and that's awesome. And that's why I love Tyranids. You can build them 6 to 7 different ways without even blinking. Alright, I'll continue on to the next model, and dare I say, the best model in the game. Welcome to the Toxicrene stonks. They're always going up. Everybody should have a Toxicrene. You get one, I get one. This is a model that a lot of people don't bring because they're so afraid of just having fun in the game. Oh no, he's so easy to see, or oh no, you can't move him around. And yes, it's annoying, and yes, it is stupid, but the Toxicrene, I bring him in every list, regardless if it's good or not. This is my bread and butter. If there's a thing in the game called a distraction Carnifex, which is you have a unit that everybody focuses on, and even though they don't realize that the unit's garbage, this is my distraction Carnifex, because when people see the Toxicrene, they freak out because they see this imposing creature. And in reality, he costs a little bit too much points. He's 150. He should really cost 130, but I love this guy, and especially with some of his abilities. He has anti-infantry, so he gets, his auto hits on he just grinds up infantry-based models like this Chaos Space Marine right here. And he also has this really cool ability where if an opponent would try to fall back, which is to, get away from a melee, he has the ability where if the roll is good, he keeps them stuck in combat. That is so good, especially if you can get to your opponent's artillery line or units that are bad in melee but great in shooting. Locking them down to be stuck in melee is such a godsend, and he's just an absolute distraction and everything that I need in my army. And he's just a cute little guy. Another cool thing about him is he is always in the lore. He's always, excreting this miasma around him. And whenever he ends his movement phase, nearby enemy units will take mortal wounds based on rolls. And it is so good to just whittle down your opponent before you even shot or you're even charging them to fight them in melee. It can really make the difference. And since it's mortal wounds, which is pretty much true damage in this game, you can, I can work on vehicles as well. They can work on monsters. it's really solid, and I think everybody should pick up a Toxicrene. You know, you probably saw in the video that he's missing a couple of his little noodles, and I have them. I need to glue them back on. Do they break? Yes. Do I still love my damaged son? Absolutely. And you need to say something nice to him in the comments. I'm looking for you. But yeah, I absolutely love my little sweetheart. And I'm going to go on and talk about some of the other people on my list. Bye. Alright, so up next we have the Screamer Killer. This is the updated one. There was an older version of it, and it looked kind of rough for its age, but now we have this new and improved version of him. This is your hulking melee threat with a pretty nice ranged attack. Fantastic melee, and for his ranged attack, he's able to make enemies battle shock. You know, he can make them attempt to battle shock them, which is pretty much whenever a unit receives the battle shock, you know, roll, they have to roll their leadership or less. At least if I remember correctly. So pretty much they have to pass a leadership check, and if they don't, that unit is no longer allowed to use stratagems, as well as their OC, which is objective control, becomes 0. And so a lot of these units in my list, especially because I have the ability Shadow in the Warp, I'm able to inflict battle shock relatively often and with different units. And sometimes if I am fighting a battle shock unit, I can actually get benefits based on other units in my list. So, you know, imagine these big hulking charging monsters that come at you charging and, you know, shocking, you know, your opponent's army. It can really make the difference, especially if they need to use their command points to either save units, re-roll saves, and things in that nature. And the Screamer Killer is a cheap, effective monster that can really get the job done. And yeah, he's been such a good add-on. I got him from the Leviathan box, you know, with a couple, you know, with a lot of these units, like the Von Ryan Leapers, the Neurotyrant, and the Screamer Killer, Psychophage. Like, it was a very nice box that helped really solidify the rest of my army, and I couldn't have asked more from it. And yeah, the Screamer Killer, he's the man who gets the job done. And yeah, not too much more to talk about him. He's a big imposing threat, and he gets it done. Alright, we'll go on to the next one. Alright, speaking of the Leviathan box, this was another unit that came out, the Psychophage. Originally this model was a feel no pain, you know, aura to give out to my unit, so that he would give out 6+ feel no pain. So effectively, every instance of damage a unit would take, I would roll a d6, and for every 6, you get to ignore that damage. Nowadays, they've changed him up to make him, I would say, a little bit more fair. And instead, what the Psychophage, because his entire job is he's supposed to be like an anti-psyker, which is like your mage, or, you know, that's kind of how the unit's supposed to be. The Psychophage, his new job is he's such a good setup piece to give your melee attackers armor penetration -1. So pretty much he makes it easier where, like, let's say your opponent on a d6 is saving on a 3. Now, by giving your units AP -1, that will make your opponent, instead of saving on a 3, it makes them save on a 4. And so that can really make the difference in a, you know, army like mine, because one thing I can do is I can shoot with the Psychophage, and then my Screamer Killer or any of my other melee based, you know, monsters can just run in and just shred whatever I need, especially if it's a tankier target that has a higher save, like, you know, like tanks or other monsters. And the Psychophage, even though I do miss the feel no pain, I think this version is healthier for the format, and it really adds more to that monstrous, that Crusher Stampede thematics that I'm trying to obtain. Because that's what I ultimately enjoy. I love just shoving down the board and just making your life a living hell. And yeah, I absolutely love my Psychophage. And I believe his range, I think he's a flamethrower. I think it has like the anti-psyker keyword. So if you're fighting an army that has a lot of psyker units, and to just show benefit, why wouldn't I? Alright, I'll go on to the next guy. Alright, and we have come to the Norn Emissary. There are two different versions of it. There's the more psyker based version, more like ranged one, and then you have the assimilator, which is your melee one. I like to run the Emissary just because I like its stats and what it can do a little bit better than the Assimilator. I want eventually to get both of them, but for right now, I have the Emissary. And yeah, the Norn is pretty much as close to the hive mind, leadership as we can get in the game. This is a massive, big model that is intimidating, and it is the monster of this list because it comes in with the ability Singular Purpose, where effectively at the beginning of the game you can select two modes. You have one where you select one enemy and you get to re-roll your attack and your wound rolls against that model, so it's your Singular Purpose. And then the one that most people use when they play these Norns is you get to pick an objective on the tabletop, and you get a Feel No Pain of 5+. You get 15 OC, so your objective control becomes 15 while you're on that objective, and it is just such an impressive model. And I know a lot of people bring triple Norns so they can be like, oh, I have my deployment zone, your opponent has their deployment zones, and then you have pretty much 3 objectives in the middle typically, and you'll just get each Norn to dedicate to protect that objective, and it becomes such a slog for your opponent to deal with, but is the ultimate just big monster that just plays King of the Hill effectively and says, I am not getting off this objective. It is not worth your time. You should go somewhere else. I absolutely love the Norn Emissary. And it's got like 3 different ranged attacks where it has like a single strike, a sweeping strike, and it has like a character killing type of attack. And it is just so much fun to use this model. Managed to pick it up. I won't lie, this is a 3D printed version of the Norn Emissary just because your boy needs to save money however he can. And I was also having an issue at the time getting this model just because everybody was ordering it, and they were just, GW always runs out. And so I was like, you know what? Somebody's got the 3D print. I picked it up. I got it. I'm proxy friendly because, in this game, the way, I think everybody should just have a way to get into the game as cheap as possible, because ultimately we're all here to have fun, and that's my policy on proxying. That's just who I am, and that's who I'll be. But yeah, the Norn Emissary, absolute fantastic model. I'm so happy they finally got introduced into the game, because in the lore we've known about the Norns for a while, but finally we get to see them in person and even get them in lore books to just see how much of a threat that they can be. Alright, I'll go on to the next one. Alright, and up next we have the Neurotyrant. This is the brain bug. This is the manifestation of the hive mind on the battlefield. And it's a smaller guy, but I think its job is equally important. He is such a key piece to my list, especially because when I use my faction's ability of Shadow and the Warp, every single unit my opponents have, they have to make a battle shock test. And I can use this in my command phase or my opponent's command phase. And if the Neurotyrant is on the battlefield, they also have to roll at -1. So, just by having this guy on the battlefield, he makes my faction ability even stronger. And something I didn't explain when it comes to Tyranids is the way it works, especially with the Hive Mind, you have the unending swarms, but they are mindless. And so you have these higher tiered monsters who are able to use like almost a relay network from the hive mind to give commands and orders at the instant that they need it. And so the Neurotyrant, one of the things that it does is we have synapse. And typically when we have to do leadership checks for our units, if we are within synapse or our unit has that keyword, instead of rolling 2 dice for leadership checks, they roll 3. And something that's cool with a Neurotyrant is once per round, I am able to give out 2 null modules, pretty much little tokens that are kind of like bite-sized versions of the Neurotyrant. I can give it to 2 units, and they always count as being in synapse. So I can give this to units who normally don't have it, and it makes it even easier for me to handle battle shocks. And it's just so nice to have. You know, something you don't think about often, but if you're not having to worry about battle shock tests, then it just makes your game go by so much quicker and smoother. And yeah, the Neurotyrant, he's a linchpin in my list, and sometimes when I'm not using the Flying Hive Tyrant as my warlord, I'll make it the Neurotyrant just because he can just sit in the back on the objective, be safe, and just be a nuisance just for existing. And yeah, he came out in the Leviathan box, and if you guys do enjoy reading lore related stuff, even though Tyranids, you never get it from their perspective because everything is like transmissions or things that have been broadcasted based on what the Tyranids have done. In the Leviathan book that came out about 3 odd years ago now, audiobook, you can find it on Audible, all that stuff, you get to see a Neurotyrant enact its will and slowly, without too much spoilers, like it really sets the tone for what this model is and does. And I think it's a fantastic book that you should give a read. And yeah, Neurotyrant, mwah, cash money. What else can I say? Alright, up next we have the Neurolictor. This is a bioform that has been handcrafted to do espionage, to infiltrate. This is the character killer model in my list. His entire singular purpose, see what I did there? If he's able to kill a character model, I can get command points. I can get 1 command point back. And that's just so good to have as a model. Because if you have any form of generation, any form of CP generation and or reduction, it just makes your list even stronger. And it's just so nice because even with this model, he can also battle shock units near it and units that are battle shocked. Either they subtract 1 from their attacks if they're within 12 of him, or I can add 1 to the rune roll if my friendlies are attacking it. And he's just such a clutch character model for me because he can just run in, he can kill your opponent's leaders that are inside a blob of infantry that they have, for example, and get away with some pretty nifty kills. And I love running the Neurolictor. I think he's just such a fun model just to have in your army. He's super cheap, and he just got buffed, everybody. Yeah, he's a lot cheaper now. And yeah, he obviously has all the fun keywords that you could want with him, just like with precision. Being able to, instead of attacking like the group of models, he's able to attack the character model itself. So he does everything you need him to do. And you know, what's more to talk about him? You know, he's a great infiltration unit, and I love him. All right, so up next we have the Mawloc. This is obviously a 3D printed version of one. Like I said, I couldn't find it, so I should get my hands on one that wasn't, you know, triple the price because, you know, living in the United States, it's a little bit harder to find some of these models. But yeah, this is the Mawloc. This is a tunneling behemoth of a monster who effectively digs underground and does something similar to the flying Hive Tyrant, where he's able to deep strike in within, you know, 9 inches or further from enemy models. And a really fun thing that he can do is when he unburrows himself, if you can get the angles, you know, if your opponent has anything in their back line that they didn't, you know, properly measure out and everything, he can deep strike in, and any enemy unit within 12 inches of him, they have to, dice have to be rolled to see if mortal wounds are inflicted, and if he's able to get I think 5 or 6, maybe a 6, you can force your opponent to take a battle shock test. And so it's nice little chip damage to have him pop up and, deal a little bit of damage. And then because he deep striked in at 9, all he has to do is make a 9-inch charge and he's in. And he's got a pretty decent melee profile. Eventually, I hope to get, I think, the new Red Terror, who I think is going to be a fantastic model because, if he pops up and he doesn't make the charge, he can dig back underground to safety. And so, with the Mawloc, he's my, I enjoy playing him because I love doing the tunneling network stuff. I think that's pretty much it with him. He's just pretty much a sandworm, effectively. Very Dune kind of feel to him. And you saw by the size of him just how massive he is. And he's like I said, he's a fun model. He's able to do at least minimum 3 to 5 mortal wounds when he pops out. And that's pretty nice, especially since you're in your opponent's backline now, so you can threaten their you're not in their deployment zone. You can, contest the objective that they have. And yeah, pretty solid model. Another banger of a monster unit, dare I say. Alright, right here we have the Maleceptor. Before some of these newer brain bugs that came out, this guy was one of the brain bugs, as you can see with the purple brains on him. He is an awesome unit whose entire design is to just blow up. He does pretty good high damage to tankier targets because he uses effectively a psyker based attack. He's also really cool where if you are too close to him, I think if you're within 6 inches of him, you have -1 to hit. And if you're below half strength, effectively if you have 10 models and you're below 5, you're below that, your starting strength of a model or of a unit, then you also have -1 to your wound roll as well. And so this guy is just really solid for just taking out tankier targets. And if I can get him up the board, especially supporting other melee-based units, he can suddenly turn a charge of, 10 guys that hit on 3, 10 guys that have 3 attacks, and if any of them are within 6 of him, suddenly that entire unit goes from 30 attacks to 20, which can really make the difference. It doesn't reduce their attacks, it reduces their hits. So if they're hitting on 2s, they're now hitting on 3s. That's my bad. There's a lot to remember when it comes to Warhammer, and you'll get used to it. You don't even have to play the tabletop if you don't want to. I collect models just for the fun of it sometimes. Not even all of them are stuff that I even worry about. And all sorts of people get into Warhammer for all sorts of reasons. Some do it for the lore, some do it for the books, some do it for the models, some do it for the painting. And, and this community, as toxic as some people make it out to be, genuinely, most of everybody I've ever interacted with, they have been super sweet. And you can be talking to your opponent and being like, hey man, like, I'm new to your army, or I'm not understanding, and they honestly will take the time to explain as much as they can. And I was even at a tournament, about a year and a half ago at this point. And while I was there, I was fighting somebody who was playing World Eaters, and just having him explain his units to me, even pointing out the key targets. Like, he didn't have to do that. We were at an official tournament effectively, and he didn't have to do that, but he spent the time to do that for me, because this is my first tournament. And maybe one day I'll talk about it, but it was one of those 2 days events, but I only did one day just because I was so tired and I had a lot going on at that point. I just wanted to go for the experience, and it was just so much fun. But yeah, no. Going back to the Maleceptor, like I said, great bug. Honestly, would recommend everybody at least get one and giving it a try. I think he's worth his points. I think he gets the job done, and he sells the monster fantasy, especially if you want to go more melee oriented. All right, I'll go on to the next little guy. All right, and we're finally here. We got the Haruspex. This guy is an absolute beat stick of a unit. He is so much fun, and I was happy I was able to pick this guy out. I think it was another 3D printed model I picked up, and he had a lot of like crab add-ons, and obviously I'm gonna go for the crab claws and everything. He is a gigantic open gaping maw of just death and grinding up the infantry models that he's fighting. He is so much fun, especially if he can get to this. He's just an infantry killing machine. He's able to inflict battle shock, and even his ranged weapon that he has. So a cool thing that you can do is, let's say your opponent has like a 10-man squad with like a captain. He can use his range, tendril that you see right there to strike and maybe kill that captain with precision, and then run up and engorge itself with its shoveling claws, because this model in the lore is just effectively shoveling people into its mouth and just eating them alive. And and the Haruspex is just so much fun, because I think another detachment that Tyranids have is they have God, I can't even remember what they are, but effectively they're models where in like the lore, as they clean up the planet, they will consume everything, bring it to a biomass pool, and effectively put it in the pool to be siphoned up to the hive mind. And that's their entire job. And this is what that guy does. He shovels in biomass and just goes and repurposes it either for more units and or just to send it to the unending appetite of the hive mind. The Haruspex, absolutely a phenomenal model. I think he's like a top 5 monster model for Tyranids that somebody should run at least once. And it's just so much fun with him. Hoping he gets more buffs. Can't go wrong with him. I think he's so much fun. And also, you saw like the size comparison of him compared to a, to a little Space Marine model, and so you can just get that like imagery of just like a bunch of dudes having to deal with this guy charging down the battlefield. Especially if I can use my Crusher Stampede to just run through buildings and suddenly, there's a big ass monster next to you. Alright, we'll keep going on. Alright, and now we come to the cornerstone unit of pretty much every Tyranid's army. This is the Exocrine. This is your artillery. This is your howitzer cannon. This is your this guy has, I believe, a 48-inch range on a table that's 44 by 60. If he can see you, you are gone. This guy is a literal living artillery. You can even see like his little white head underneath the gun. Because a cool thing about Tyranids, especially in the lore, all of their artillery, all of their weapons, everything is bioorganic. So they are literally shooting living creatures at like Mach 3 to hit your opponent. And the Exocrine, you will normally see this model taken 3 times in every list. And maybe changing up in 11th edition because 1, he's gone up in points, and 2, it costs more if you have a 3rd unit because they're trying to stop spamming. I only run 1 copy of this guy. I think that's enough. I have him and the Tyrannofex. And also, I like having variety in my list, so having 1 of each is just my way of playing the game. But yeah, the Exocrine is just so fun because he just has this bullshit range. He hits like a fucking truck. Like, the Tyrannofex hits hard. I think he hits harder, especially if you get the good rolls. Sorry, he has a 36-inch range. Correction. But still, that's half the board right there. And it's so good. He's so good at single target as well as hitting multiple units because he has blast. And so some of the things that are cool about the Exocrine, besides how awesome he fucking looks, because if he shoots at a unit, he has this thing called symbiotic targeting. So in your shooting phase, after this model has shot, select 1 enemy unit hit by 1 or more of these attacks. Until the end of the phase, each time a friendly Tyranid's model makes an attack, which means shooting or melee, that targets that unit. Oh, sorry. It's until the end of the phase, so it's only shooting. My bad. You can tell I've been rusty. I haven't played 40k in a second, so I gotta remind myself about rules. There's always something to be learning. So, in that phase of me shooting, any Tyranid's models that make an attack that target that unit, they can reroll hit rolls of 1. Because in this game, it's a D6 system. 6s are always critical successes, 1s are always critical fails. And so having the ability where you roll 6 dice and 1 of them is a 1, you can re-roll that dice, which means your math becomes better in terms of hitting, killing, and damaging. In terms like that. And it is just so much fun to use this model. Because like I said, it's just a living artillery or cannon. And what more could you want than that? And like I said, everybody at minimum has 3 of them. And so I wouldn't say to take that many, but I'm not a tournament player, so I could be just talking out of my ass. But I think he's a fantastic monster, and at minimum, I think he's a top 3 for this list. You should take 1. Alright, and so another new addition that came out with the Leviathan box, we have the Barbgaunts. Effectively, these guys have missile launchers that, are living missile launchers that they shoot and everything. I think they don't even have eyes on their head. The eyes are on the missile launchers themselves. I need to finish painting them, but, with these models, they are a nice kind of, a smaller artillery. It's just what I call them. They have a 24-inch range. They have blast. And so what blast is, should I explain it with the Exocrine, is for every 5 models in your opponent's unit that you're shooting, you get to add an additional attack. Or you get to roll an additional dice for that attack. So if you're shooting at a group of 5, you add 1 more. If you're shooting at a group of 10, you add 2 dice. If that makes sense. They are super good, and I don't see that many people play them. I don't know if it's just because they don't like the range or they don't like the damage output. For me, this unit isn't even about damage. This unit has one purpose that I really enjoy them for. They have disruptive bombardment. So, in a shooting phase, after shooting a shot, select 1 enemy infantry unit hit by 1 or more of your attacks. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, that unit is disrupted. Whenever a unit is disrupted, subtract 2 from its move characteristics, subtract 2 from its advance, and charge rolls made for it. So if your opponent has like Emperor's Children, they have World Eaters, like they have a super like melee heavy infantry based faction, by shooting with these Barbgaunts, not only are you shooting typically into a bigger blob of people, typically 5 to 10 at minimum, you also get the additional benefit of, let's say they have a move characteristic of 6. Well, if they're disrupted now it's only 4. And if they try to advance where they have a d6 die roll that they add to their movement, it gets subtracted as well. And it is just so nice. Because I still need to make sure, because I subtract 2 from the move characteristic and subtract 2 from advance and charge rolls. I think that stacks as well. So you get the -2 their move and the -2 their advance. And whenever they need to do a charge, which is how they get into melee to fight, which is the entire purpose of that unit, it's also a -2. And so you can make these these charges that suddenly were like, ooh, if this guy gets to my backline or gets to an important model, they're gonna fuck them up. But with this unit, I can be like, actually, no, I'm gonna fuck up your unit and make it slow as hell and kind of kite them. This is something a lot of people just don't realize the power of the Barbgaunts, which, like I said, their damage output, that's not why they're there. They're there to slow down your opponent. Because even though it's, I think you can only use this once per unit. So that's like the limiting factor when it comes to this. But, regardless, I think the Barbgaunts are such a niche unit. And I think you should be taking them. That's just me. Because, your opponent's bound to run something with melee. And even if you're not shooting, like, a big blob of, like, infantry with, like, a captain, like a smash captain, if you pick, like, their greater demon who wants to run down the battlefield and fuck up your monsters, well, suddenly, he's a lot fucking slower, and thus, you get to live longer. Anything to disrupt your enemy is just such a good thing to have, especially in a melee-focused army, kind of like I'm running with Crusher Stampede. I want to charge into you. I don't want you charging into me. And, I'll just stand by it. I think Barbgaunts, you should give them a try. Alright, and right here we have our Winged Tyranid Prime. This is another model that came out in the beginning of 10th edition with the Leviathan box. He is a very cheap and efficient model that I like to use personally in my army. He has Deep Strike, so once again, I can deploy him from my reserves 9 inches or further away from an enemy model, so he is very nice to be able to score points with, especially later in the game, or a little bit earlier if I need to, because let's say I draw a mission that says, oh, get to your opponent's deployment zone. Boom. If my opponent doesn't have anything in his backline to screen for him, he shows up, scores me easy victory points. And like I said, I really do focus on the deep strike aspect of these models, because deep striking is just such a very versatile tool, and it's almost like an intimidation for your opponent, because they will know you have deep strike units based on what you deploy and like you explain to your opponent. And so if they're worried about my deep strike units, what ends up happening is they have 2 choices. Either they keep units in the back to screen off my deep strikers, thus they don't go to the front lines, which means my monsters have an easier time killing their front line, or they have to push up to deal with their failing front line, and now I'm in the back, and I can start being more disrupted. Like, I can charge a tank and keep it from shooting at super high damaging profiles into my monsters, or I can capture objectives with this unit, because most of the time if they keep units in the back, they're either going to be like tanks that shoot super far, or they're going to be like cultists, like really weak mob like units that are just there just to screen and slash hold an objective. And another cool thing about the Winged Tyranid Prime is he has a fight on death. So if he was to die before he gets the fight, I can roll a dice, and if it succeeds the roll, I can fight before I remove the model from the tabletop. And so being able to have that constant threat of, all right, I dropped in, I charged, I fought, and I lived, which means my opponent's next turn, if they go to kill my model, I will then be able to possibly fight on death and finish off, if not kill off that unit. So just having that versatility, especially for 65 points, you can't go wrong with a unit like this. And yeah, I like my little guy. I think he gets his job, and his points are absolutely worth it for that cost. Alrighty, and finally, the thing that gets most people into Tyranids, the unending swarm, the Termagaunts. These are your basic, they are your battle line units. They are there to hold the line, score objectives, and just be a nuisance. They are a lot of fun. They come in groups of 10 up to 20. And since they're battle line, you can have 6 groups of them. So if one day, I hope when I have the funds, I would absolutely love to build 120 of these guys. I have about 40 right now. But I want to get 120 of them. And because that's only I think that's only going to be 600-ish points. More than a fourth of your army if you're paying 2,000 points. This is the ranged versions of them. So the Termagaunts. I don't have any of them, but they have a melee version called the Hormagaunts. These guys are just they're so much fun because another thing I like about Tyranids, especially when it comes to these little gribbly guys, it's a lot of fun to just watch them die and watch them get fucked up. You can see me putting more models there to just... those are some of the extras I still need to paint and everything. But half the fun of me playing Tyranids, besides playing that big monster, thematics, is it's fun to watch just Tyranids die. It's like watching Starship Troopers and everything, and just watching the bugs get taken care of. I'm doing my part. And yeah, the Termagaunts, very efficient. I think they're a lot of fun. Sometimes I'll throw them in if I have the points. Otherwise, I'll take them when I need them. Alright. And so, with that, everybody, I have gone over my Tyranids, gone over the units and what they do, and, sort of the idea that I'm trying to do with this particular list. Once again, each army, each faction has its own unique play style. Some of them are focused in different aspects, and even within that, they have different detachments, which is another way for them to play, And Tyranids is such a beginner-friendly army that I would recommend it to everybody. And a lot of people really do enjoy that beginner-friendly 40k experience. Nothing screams fun than a shit ton of models, big-ass fucking models, and just, things like that. And, thank you for everybody who has reached this point. You have been an absolute doll, and I'm glad I got to yap for you guys for almost an hour now. This is so much fun. I love hobbying. If any of you have any armies, or you're thinking about building an army, or just, you're just thinking about getting into Warhammer 40k, feel free to ask questions. Somebody will respond if I don't. The community is nice. Everybody is inviting in their own way. Of course, you have your bad eggs, but in reality, it's a fantastic hobby. Once you get past the price point, I won't lie to you, the price point can get people, but when there's a will, there's a way. And yeah, thank you guys for joining me here today. I love talking about my hobbies, and I love just chatting with you guys. It gives me, a sense of purpose in life. And the more of you guys that subscribe to the channel, which by the way, like and subscribe, yeah, I'm gonna do that to you. The more of you that join, just the more stories we can make. I love listening to people talk about their hobbies. And, hopefully some of you can tell me, hey TK, you got me into so and so, whether it's Fallout, whether it's Warhammer, Kill Team. Maybe one day I'll talk about Halo, and also, all sorts of different, different franchises and things like that. But all that matters is you have fun, you enjoy your hobbies, and never stop being a whimsical little creature. You're all my little guys, and I couldn't be prouder of you. Alright, talk to you guys later, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Mwah, little kiss. Mwah.